Hello, are you here to talk about cannibalism as well? We're going to talk about the cannibalism musical. What do you have to say? Swept Away is a jukebox musical featuring the work of the Avett brothers. It asks the audience questions about guilt, survival, the things you do in impossible situations. And before we get into any of the history that inspired it, I wanted to say, go and see it. If you have the opportunity to go and see this show before it closes in the few short days that are left, you absolutely should. This cast, this creative team, they have put so much into the show. It is wonderful. The music is incredible. The cast is incredible. The storytelling is amazing. If you have the opportunity, if you are in New York City before it closes at the end of the year, you absolutely should go and see Swept Away. The show is loosely inspired by the real-life wreck of the Mignonette, which took place in 1884, but it is not telling the story of the Mignonette. It takes elements from the Mignonette, the Essex, and some other famous shipwrecks and survival cannibalism encounters in order to weave a story that is driven by its archetypes and its message. The premise for Swept Away the musical is fairly simple. We have four main characters plus an ensemble, we are on a whaling boat, and nobody has any names. The first mate is jaded, sarcastic, gruff, perpetually done with the world. The captain is aged and past his prime, knowing that there is nothing left for him in life but the sea, but even the sea itself is being taken from him as the whaling industry is dying. We also have the two brothers. Little brother has run away from home seeking adventure in the great wide somewhere. Big brother has come after him in order to persuade him to return to their small farming town where it is safe. The plot of the show is fairly simple. Our first half is on the whaling ship as the crew sets out on another final voyage. Then the ship wrecks and we enter our second half in which our four main characters are the only survivors, trapped in a lifeboat with no food, no water, and no hope. The second half is exploring them grappling with the question of what to do to ensure their own survival and if those actions are acceptable. Let's talk about the historical events that inspired the show, namely the wreck of the Mignonette. In 1884, an Australian businessman hired a crew of 4 sailors in order to transport his newly purchased sailing yacht, the Mignonette, from England to Australia. The crew set out, taking a southerly course towards the Cape of Good Hope. However, they were wrecked in a storm. The crew of 4 ended up in the lifeboat together and discovered that all they had for supplies was 2 tins of turnips. Not good. After almost 3 weeks of drifting at sea, one of the crew members, Dudley, proposed the unthinkable, that they should kill and eat one of their number in order to ensure the survival of the other 3. Dudley and Stevens, another one of the crew members, looked upon the youngest of their number, the cabin boy, Richard Parker, who was 16 years old and allegedly already dying. The men would later testify in court that Parker had drunk seawater and was flitting in and out of a coma. Thus, in killing him, they would not only ensure their own survival, but also give him a peaceful passage into death. While the men did argue a bit over it, ultimately the deed was done. Richard Parker was killed, the remaining 3 men drank his blood, ate his flesh, and sucked out the marrow from his bones. The lifeboat and 3 surviving crew were found a few days later by a German vessel and brought to the port of Falworth. At the time of his actions, Dudley argued that this was partaking in the so-called custom of the sea, in which a sailor could be killed in a shipwreck in order to preserve the life of his others, and that this was not a crime. Nevertheless, upon their return to land, the 3 men were arrested and put on trial for murder. The actual main affront that most of the public took to the action was not the murder and the cannibalism itself, but rather the fact that the men had not drawn lots. In previous instances of survival cannibalism and shipwrecks, sailors had drawn lots, or at least said they'd drawn lots, in order to choose who amongst them would die. Dudley had not done this. Instead, he had simply put forward one of the other crew members and said, you shall die. And that was actually what got most of the public riled up. Upon telling their story to the harbour master and to the police, Dudley, Stevens, and the 3rd, Brooks, were arrested on charges of murder. Brooks would ultimately be acquitted and brought forward as a witness against the other 2. Brooks' story was that he did not object to the act of killing and eating another crew member, but rather that he had refrained because he thought that they should have drawn lots instead, and that that was the proper custom of the sea. Dudley and Stevens stood by the fact that they had killed Richard Parker because he was dying anyway. Men were brought up on charges of murder, then released on bail as the case transferred to the London courts. Both men did appear for their London trial. One account that I read said that the older brother of Richard Parker was actually in the courthouse when they were brought in, and that he stood up, crossed the room to them, and shook their hands. It seemed that he, like them, understood the custom of the sea to have allowed for the murder of his younger brother. The initial jury trial failed to return a proper verdict. The following judge's trial did return one, guilty and a sentence of hanging. However, the Attorney General felt that public pressure was so much in favor of the men, and that there were still legal questions about the jurisdiction of the court, and that the judge had not properly followed through with logic about murder by necessity, that he commuted the men's sentence to 6 months imprisonment and then released them in May of 1885. The case of R versus Dudley and Stevens remains one of the most famous in British legal history, which brings us back around to Swept Away. For while the men in the Mignonette talked openly about what they had done, in the universe of Swept Away, the crew has not spoken about the actions that they took in that lifeboat. Now, if you are one of the lucky few who is going to see the show in its final few days, this is the point in which I do recommend pausing the video, going and watching the show, and then coming back and tell me what you think of the ending, because here's where we're going to get into the big twist that is different from history. In the little lifeboat spinning around in the ocean is the captain, despondent and out of energy at the loss of his ship and his men and his own failures, the mate slipping slowly into madness as he hears Satan whispering in his mind, and the two brothers, little brother who has been grievously injured in the sinking of the ship, and big brother ever desperate to protect him and get him home safe to their family. And as the days turn to weeks, as rain fails to come, the mate proposes that they kill little brother and eat his body, for after all, he is dying already. Big brother is horrified. Who is this madman who stands in the lifeboat proposing cannibalism? The two wrestle. It is a wonderful conflict between the two characters that truly captures the essence of the debate. Mate does not deny the horrific nature of the action. He does not deny the grief that is going to come to Big Brother with this, but what he says is that all four are doomed if they do not take this action, and the life of one can save the life of the other three. As the men wrestle, it is little brother who speaks up and tells big brother that he will sacrifice himself in order to save big brother, just as big brother has been sacrificing again and again to try and help little brother. Now shall little brother become the sacrificial lamb. Big brother agrees, takes the knife from mate, cradles his little brother in his arms and raises it high, and sacrifices himself instead. And the three crew are left with the body of Big Brother. They follow through with the action. They go through what had been discussed. His sacrifice saves the lives of his little brother, as well as the mate and the captain. And when they are eventually picked up by another ship, that ship sinks the lifeboat along with the bones of Big Brother, and they all never speak of it again. Swept Away is ultimately a show about sacrifice, about family ties, about brotherhood at sea, and about how far we'll go to help those that we love. This contrasts with the wreck of the Mignonette, in which the question was not just about how far will you go to help others, but how far will you go to save yourself. In Swept Away, family is right on board, brothers side by side. In the Mignonette, family was far away, wives and children back home, an older brother on some other ship. But both are entangled with the question of how far is too far. The subject of survival cannibalism, especially at sea, has titillated and enraptured the public, whether it is the crew of the Mignonette, the Essex, or the fictitious unnamed men of Swept Away. Ultimately, what we're fascinated in is that question of how far will humans go to survive in desperate, impossible situations, particularly on the ocean, where civilization, help, and safety are so far away. Hello, are you going to come down and join me for the final little closeout? That'd be beautiful and wonderful. Hello. Thank you for listening to this discussion of the Mignonette and Swept Away. I'll put my sources down in the description below, and again, if you can go and see the show before it closes, please go and do so.